All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Dr. Sadie Audi, the Organic Chemistry Lab Coordinator at Keck Science Department and Faculty Co-Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. And our guest speaker today is Melissa Medina, who is a Professor and Associate Dean for Assessment and Evaluation at the University of Oklahoma College of Pharmacy, and is also the Director of their Preparing Future Faculty program. And Melissa, you can take it away. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to come and talk to you today about student ratings of instruction, or sometimes we shorthand that to course evaluations. That's probably a more familiar term, where students are evaluating your course and your teaching or your teaching. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic because it's really important when you're a faculty member to know what your course evaluations, what the process is, and how you should be using them, and how your university is using them. And sometimes that's not always clear to people. So I want to talk to you about that and talk to you about some best practices as well. So I'll tell you a little bit more about who I am. So I am actually from New Jersey. So I went to undergrad and graduate school at Rutgers in New Jersey. And I went to the Graduate School of Education. Then when I finished, my doctorate was in educational psychology. I looked at learning, cognition, and development and assessment, how students learn. And then I moved to Oklahoma and got a job at OU College of Pharmacy. So I have lots of different hats in the college and on our campus. So I am at the Health Sciences Center. So we're in Oklahoma City. We have 7 different colleges in the health sciences spanning medicine, dentistry, allied health, public health, PA program, nursing, and then pharmacy and a graduate college. So we have a undergrad campus, and we have another campus that is south and north of our campus in Oklahoma City. And in the graduate college, as Sadie mentioned, I am the Director of Preparing Future Faculty. Also at the College of Pharmacy, I am in charge of teaching improvement, teaching effectiveness program called STEP. So we do scholarship and teaching excellence program. That's for any faculty on our campus. We have a variety of certificate programs that are available. So I work in all of the different colleges, and then I also work in our college. So one of my jobs in the college is assessment, and I do accreditation, and I'm also in charge of course evaluations. So my very first day here at OU, which was 23 years ago, seems hard to believe to me. I feel like I've lost a little bit of my New Jersey accent. After my very first day here, the department chair we have 2 departments, our department chair came and said, "We want you to revise our course evaluations." Oh, okay, sounds pretty easy. Well, it was a lot more involved than I had appreciated. Certainly people that had created them previously had a lot of ownership over them, and how do you make changes and really help make course evaluations meaningful for people. So I've been doing course evaluations for 23 years, and for some of my professional organizational homes, I am mainly involved in a pharmacy education organization called AACP, American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy. So we do different types. We're really focused on pharmacy education. I am the current chair of the Center for the Advancement of Pharmacy Education, which is a committee that's responsible for revising all of the program outcomes for the entire country for pharmacy students, for doctor of pharmacy students. And this is my second time chairing it. I chaired it in 2013, and then we revise those outcomes every 8 years. So I'm in the process of helping revise them right now. And I'm also an associate editor for the Pharmacy Education Journal that's related with AACP, called the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education. So being a member of AACP, one of the things that I did 15 years ago was I helped start an assessment SIG, special interest group. And one of the things we were really interested in were course evaluations. That was a big topic of conversation among all of the colleges of pharmacy. There's about 140 colleges of pharmacy across the country, Keck having one of them. So I really think a lot about course evaluations, and I am sure you do too, maybe at a different level. So I'm excited to talk to you about that experience. So I have 5 different objectives for our time together today. And when I am addressing an objective, I will have that objective number on the slide. So I'll call attention to it, or you'll notice that that objective number is on the slide. So just so you know when we're addressing these different areas. And based on these objectives, I've divided our time together into 5 different sections. So each of these objectives has a section, and we'll spend time on that. Just as some housekeeping, I'm going to do some polling questions. I'm also going to ask you some questions. I want you to ask questions that are concerning to you. So I'll give you some polls, and I also will ask you to put things in the chat. But if you have questions in the chat, then please put that in there. I will address those. If I'm missing one, I'll ask if Sadie could call my attention to those if there's something in the chat. Perfect. So I want to get started with a poll. So I may just ask you this question for you to put it in the chat. So in the past year, how many of you have received at least one course evaluation? And if it's yes, you can put that in the chat, or no. So it looks like all of you have received a course evaluation this past year. Okay, and then someone is currently not teaching. Okay, that makes sense. Have you ever received a course evaluation? But this past year, I'm particularly concerned about. Now, how about, have you reviewed those course evaluations? So if you received a course evaluation in the past year, did you open it? Did you look at the results? How many of you did that? Since I am the person in charge of the course evaluations in our college, I have faculty tell me from time to time that they don't really have much of a choice in having an evaluation opened. It's automatically open for them. However, sometimes they're just very apprehensive to open them and review what the results are. They don't want to see what the results are. And that always really concerns me, because I want to find a way to help make it more palatable. But I certainly understand why people are apprehensive to open the course evaluations. Our evaluations close, they will close on December 19th this year. And our last day of work at the university is December 22nd. So I don't release those results until after the break. I like to just let people have a clean slate when they come back. So I'm not sure if you can relate to that. But receiving an evaluation and reviewing them, it's good to get some insight about some of your experiences. Now, how many of you have made changes to your course based on your course evaluation results? Have you done this in the past? You can put that in the chat also. Okay. Yeah, they can be a really useful resource for changes. But I see here that no, they weren't helpful. Well, that happens too, that sometimes course evaluations aren't very helpful. I remember in the past, sometimes I would receive an evaluation that would say, we shouldn't have any more tests. Okay, well, I appreciate that. Even if I had a majority of students saying that we shouldn't have any tests, that's not something that I'm able to enforce. I need to give assessments, and that's sort of out of my control. So yeah, so sometimes the course evaluations aren't very helpful. So I appreciate that. Let's see. Another question, how many of you can quote to me the worst course evaluation comment you've ever received? You don't need to actually quote it to me, but could you quote it to me if I asked privately? Could you do that? Now that's assuming that you received a negative comment. Not everyone does. Okay, so it looks like you could say that. Okay. Could you quote to me the best comment that you ever received? No, probably. No. Yeah, why is it that we can remember the worst comments that are said, but we can't remember the good comments that are said? I think this is one challenge with course evaluations, is that we can focus on the negative comments and not focus on the positive comments. And certainly that can be problematic. So we'll talk about that today. And we'll talk about just how you can use the results to improve your own teaching. So for the first part, I just want to talk to you about course evaluation goals and then some feedback sources. So certainly when we think about course evaluations or student evaluations of teaching, again, we use those terms interchangeably. I conducted a review article in 2019, and when we did this systematic review, just finding the right terminology to actually access and to do the review was challenging because people have called them so many different things. So like I said, I'll use course evaluation or student evaluations of teaching interchangeably. But if we think about course evaluations, the goal being formative assessment to offer you feedback to improve your future teaching, to me, that is the best benefit from a student evaluation of teaching, is that you can receive feedback from your learners about how they're receiving your instruction, and they can offer you insights into what you're doing well and what you should keep doing, and then areas of improvement. Another thing I really like about course evaluations in the formative assessment realm is that they allow you to document and track your improvement over the years. So one of the things I'm in charge of, I do faculty development in our college too, and for our university. And when I talk to them about teaching improvement, I talk about teaching portfolios and even your promotion dossier. If you have a table of what your results were every year and what are those trends. So course evaluations allow you to personally document those trends over time. And that can be helpful. Maybe you're always high. Maybe there's a year that there was a dip. Really useful information. So I love course evaluations for formative assessment. However, being in an assessment role and being a professor and doing faculty development for our faculty and residents and graduate students, a common concern that I get from people is that if I get a bad course evaluation, I am not going to get promoted. I don't know if any of you have ever felt that way, that if I get a bad course evaluation, that is going to hinder my ability to get promoted. And I think this is a very important question to ask in your college. When has that happened? So in our college, when faculty say that to me, I have been at the university for 23 years. I evaluate people's packets on a regular basis for promotion. And I will tell them, I have never seen an instance where a faculty member didn't get promoted because they had bad course evaluations. However, what concerns a promotion and tenure committee is when you consistently have bad course evaluations over time. So one bad course evaluation is certainly not going to hinder your ability to get promoted. But if you consistently are experiencing low course evaluation scores and comments, it starts to raise the question of what is going on and what efforts are you doing to fix that process. So one bad course evaluation is not going to be a kiss of death in most institutions, but regular and consistent poor course evaluations can be a problem. Now, that relates to our second goal of using course evaluations. That's for summative types of assessment when we're using course evaluations for annual review, or we're using them for promotion and tenure, even for maybe local or national awards, teaching awards. They want to see what your teaching evaluations are. They may also even be used in course review. My college has a curriculum committee that we evaluate our courses every 3 years. We do peer review of our courses, and we use the course evaluations, often a summary of those, to see how the students have received that course over time. So course evaluations can be used for a variety of summative reasons. Now, this is sort of a spoiler alert, but a big theme that I try to educate people about, and hopefully I'm probably preaching to the choir, is that course evaluations should not be used in isolation. So when we are thinking about course evaluations for formative or summative reasons, you should always be at a minimum triangulating your results, if not including more sources of feedback. So you should be triangulating with peer feedback. If you have an instructional design specialist or a teaching excellence center, like I've been informed that you have, maybe you're doing self-reflection or teaching portfolios. So these additional 3 areas are really rich sources of data that you should be using to help understand what your course evaluations from students mean. You shouldn't be, or department chairs or deans or whomever on your campus shouldn't be evaluating your teaching by just looking at your student evaluation of teaching. They have a role, but they are not the only source of feedback. And I really just want to emphasize that. So let me talk to you a little bit more about what our sources of feedback are so that you can better understand how you should be using those. So as I listed on the previous slide, we have peers, we have educational specialists or teaching excellence center, we have self-reflection, and then of course, students. So triangulating, sometimes you're going to have an educational specialist, teaching excellence center, and or peers. Sometimes that gets lumped together. So I have 4 sources, but you really could think about triangulating with number 1 and 2. Some people have access to 1 or maybe both. So certainly peer feedback, if you have a peer evaluation of teaching program, peers are a really great source of information to evaluate your teaching. They can put your teaching into the broader context of your entire curriculum. How does your course fit into the curriculum? How does it prepare students for courses that are after your course? How does your course maximize what has happened in previous courses? How do you expand on that information provided from previous courses? In the College of Pharmacy, we are a lockstep curriculum. So all of our students take the same courses and in the same semesters, in the same years. And course content builds upon each other in a systematic and intentional way. So a peer can talk to you, can give you feedback about how your course fits into that structure. Now, sometimes in the undergraduate or graduate setting, you may be in a program that doesn't have a lockstep curriculum. Even if you don't have that, my guess is that you at least are related to a stream of content and courses that all build upon each other. So to me, if I was targeting a peer, that's who I would be asking, people that have similar coursework to me. They can evaluate the quality and level of the content that you're providing. If you are in that stream, is your course too low or too high? Are you a middle course, middle in the stream, but you're still doing low level definitions and terms, for example? So certainly peers are a rich source of feedback. I know when I was at Rutgers, my start with course evaluations and teaching excellence started when I was a teaching assistant. And we had a teaching assistant program where all of the teaching assistants across the entire university would go and observe each other. And I evaluated people that were teaching German. I don't speak German. So it was kind of an interesting exercise to see the utility of a peer. So there are some weaknesses to having a peer. Certainly, it can be difficult selecting a peer. Sometimes if you're given a choice, you may select someone that's your friend, and then they may have difficulty being objective about your teaching because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Even if they're not your friend, people can, at times, peers may feel like they don't want to hurt your feelings, or they may fear retribution themselves. If they're evaluating you negatively, you may go and evaluate them negatively or tell someone else to evaluate them negatively. So there can be some weaknesses. However, the biggest weakness that I have found is that oftentimes when we have a peer evaluation program, it's not structured. So the observations aren't structured and the process isn't as structured. Maybe there's not training that's offered. So we may not use the same tool. We may not be trained on that tool or the process. And then as a result, we're going to have variable types of information that's provided back to the peer. Probably related, sometimes the peer observation program is so intense that it's just hard to maintain this over time. I know when I first started, we had a program where faculty, we had a peer evaluation program, but then myself as this instructional specialist would come in and also review the teaching. So 2 of us were reviewing the teaching. We would review all the notes and handouts and slides before the lecture. We'd meet with the faculty member before the lecture. We would go and observe the lecture. We would write this 2 to 5 page review of what we found as a result. It was very, very labor intensive. And it was very difficult to sustain. So we've changed our process over the years to make it much more manageable. But a key factor in making it manageable, some best practice advice, is that certainly if you have a formal peer process in place that includes training and a structured rubric where you're evaluating, everyone's using the same rubric to evaluate each other. There's also some guidance to observe at least 2 observations as possible, if that's possible. But if the goal is formative assessment, so I evaluate all of our faculty in our college. We have 50 faculty in the College of Pharmacy. I evaluate everyone. And when I schedule those teaching observations, these peer observations, I tell the faculty, don't pick your best lecture. That's intuitively, you want to pick the best lecture because you want to look really great. But I remind them, this is a formative process and I am here to help you. Give me your worst lecture because that's where I'm going to offer you the most help. If you give me your best lecture, I'm probably just going to give you a lot of affirmation. And that can be helpful. I'm always going to find something that you can work on. But I really will have a lot of insights for a lecture that you're struggling with. So thinking about the peer feedback process and how we can make that better. Similarly, we may have an educational specialist come in and observe. This is a great alternative to peer feedback or as an adjunct to peer feedback. Using that structured and objective process can be very useful. And people that are educational specialists or from a teaching excellence center, they tend to have that structure in place. They have a rubric that they're going to use for everyone, and they've been trained on how to deliver feedback. So this can be hopefully a big strength for using an educational specialist. The weakness is not every college or program has this. So on our campus, we don't have a teaching excellence center. I am housed in the College of Pharmacy. I run the teaching, I run that STEP program, the Scholarship Teaching and Excellence program, where I evaluate faculty that participate in the program. But it's a lot of work, to be honest with you. I'm already evaluating all of my faculty, graduate students, and residents. So I evaluate about 75 of those people a year, in addition to campus people. So that's just a lot of evaluating. So it can be time consuming to watch all the faculty. So one thing you can consider if this is what you're doing, you can put people on a schedule. So for our faculty, our department chairs in our college agreed that we should use a schedule. So we evaluate our assistant professors every 2 years, our associate professors every 3 years, and then our professors every 4 years. Do any of you have a schedule like this, or have you used peer evaluators to come in and watch your teaching? You can put it in the chat if you've had a peer evaluator come watch you. Okay, so not a widely utilized service. So you've participated as an observer. Okay, Sarah did when you were teaching. Okay. Many times, and you've also been a peer evaluator. Yeah, sure. That's part of giving back. So if you've been evaluated, contributing back can be useful. So these are 2 sources of feedback that when you are thinking about your course evaluations from your students, you also have the potential to get additional sources of feedback. And these 2 types of feedback are really rich for helping put your student evaluations into perspective. So again, a big take-home message from today is that you shouldn't be only relying on your student evaluations of feedback. There are additional sources of feedback that are going to help you really make those evaluations much more rich. So our third source of feedback is self-evaluation. And this is related to what Brooksfield talked about in the 90s, being a critically reflective teacher. So we want you to do self-reflection. All faculty should be self-reflecting about what went well, what needs revision, and maybe you reflect on activities, what happened, hopefully taking notes instead of waiting. Sometimes faculty wait till next year. They know that it went poorly, but they'll just fix it next year when they go to redo the lecture, then they forget what happened. So trying to fix that in the moment. But self-reflection really can be very beneficial. It's part of being a scholarly teacher, from which is another important outcome that Lee Schulman talks about from the Carnegie Foundation for Teaching Excellence. So being a scholarly teacher. Now, the problem with self-reflection is that you may not be aware of how your delivery is being received. You may not be aware of some of your habits. Now, when I do a peer evaluation, I like to say that the low hanging fruit is counting up the number of times someone says, And when I ask the person that I'm evaluating, what do you want feedback about? They usually say, do I say too many times? So even though that's low hanging fruit, oftentimes there's bigger things that you could do to improve your teaching. You may not hear that if you are a faculty member. You may not hear yourself saying repeatedly. So that's one kind of minor example of self-reflection that you may miss different habits that you have. It also may be easy for you to dismiss negative feedback if you are just self-evaluating. For example, I have had faculty that have gotten maybe a week course evaluation from their students. When I question them about it, they'll say, well, my class is hard, so I am always going to get a negative evaluation from students. And that's really a misperception. Just because you have a hard class doesn't mean you're going to have negative course evaluations. So a best practice is to use a critically reflective teaching structure where you're going to self-reflect on what your goals for what the course are, maybe what your teaching philosophy is, incorporating student feedback and peer feedback, as well as consulting the educational literature. So self-reflection should be more than just you thinking intuitively, how did it go? That's one part of it, but that can often be an incomplete kind of self-reflection. Instead, we want you to ask yourself a few more questions and use more data to assist you in your self-reflection. And then finally, one of the reasons we're here today, student evaluations are a fourth source of feedback. They are very useful in helping us understand what students perceive that we do well in the classroom and what we need to improve upon. But I have listed just a few weaknesses here. I'm curious if you have any others, you can put those in the chat. So one weakness that I find is that students may not filter their comments appropriately. So all of our first year students, I give them a workshop on course evaluations and what feedback is useful to faculty and what feedback is not useful. So saying, I like your hair or I hate you is not useful for teaching improvement. And instead, we want you to focus on things that would contribute. I tell students, we want you to focus your comments on what would help you learn better. So this doesn't always pan out though. Sometimes despite giving students that training, they still just don't filter their comments appropriately and they say either just kind of negative statements or they just say observations that are not useful. Students also a weakness, they can fixate on a minor detail or on just one thing. For example, if they didn't like one of your exams or you went over time 2 lectures in a row, they may fixate on that. And that's what the course comments are all about. And then, unfortunately, nationally, there are poor response rates reported for course evaluations. I don't know if your program experiences this. Have you gotten a good response rate?
It kind of depends, I think, on which institution you're at and what type of evaluation you're using. I actually found better response rates in my lab when I switched to online evaluations versus paper, but I don't know if anyone else has other experiences.
Around 20% response rate. Yeah. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about that, but these are just some of the weaknesses of student evaluations. And as related to the question that I asked earlier, can you remember the one negative comment, the worst negative comment you've received? This oftentimes can relate to students just not being able to filter their comments appropriately or provide feedback in a constructive way that would actually help you improve. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. So if you're trying to gather feedback, course evaluations are the most obvious way. These are more of a summative type of opportunity, though, where it's just a judgment at the very end. What did students think of your course overall? You do have other options that are available. So when you're trying to engage in self-reflection, if you need to have more immediate feedback or you want more formative feedback, you can do a minute paper. So a minute evaluation. So this is based on some Cross and Angelo work from the 90s about different classroom assessment techniques where you'll do a minute paper where students will tell you the muddiest point and maybe an area that they need more information about. I have modified that to be called a minute evaluation, where students are going to rank you on a scale of 1 to 5, and then they tell you your strengths and they tell you your areas of improvement. So I use this actually for all of my residents that teach in the curriculum and my graduate students, because they only deliver 1 or 2 lectures. And I don't want to add them to my course evaluation at the end of the semester, because then my course evaluation becomes too long for students to complete. So I love minute evaluations, these kind of minute papers. So that's one option you have. Focus groups are another option. These can be a little bit complicated, though. It's helpful if you have someone who's trained in conducting focus groups. But if you just personally want to conduct it and you want to just get some very discrete information, this is certainly something that you can do. I see a post from Muriel about bias in the course evaluation results. I do have that later in the talk, so I will give that a little bit more attention as we move through this. But that is certainly a weakness of course evaluation results, so I appreciate you bringing that up. You can also conduct a mid-semester evaluation if you need to figure out, are there any adjustments you can make in the beginning, during the semester for your students. So just some different ways to gather feedback. I'm curious if you use any of these besides the end of semester evaluation. Do any of you use a minute paper, a focus group, or a mid-semester evaluation? Okay, so a couple of people use mid-semester. Have you found them useful for making changes in that semester? Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're super useful. I think they're very useful, more than the course evals. Yeah, I think sometimes I have different opinions about why they are more useful. Sometimes they're just very targeted. You only have so much teaching for the semester at that point, so there's less to comment on. So they may just comment on the really big things that would help them or that they like. It's not the full semester. You may not have had as many tests at that point. Yeah, so using those as a formative option, very, very good. So that's another area that you can include in your self-reflection, or what are the students saying in the moment. So what has been most helpful for you? So you said, many of you said mid-semester evaluations. I'm going to give you a quick poll to see which of these have been most helpful. So out of all the sources of feedback, you should have a poll that popped up. Do you see this poll?
I didn't see the poll pop up.
Oh, no. Maybe now. No. Okay. Well, we don't need to do the poll. You can just tell me in the chat. Is there something of these data sources that has been most useful? Oh, Sadie, you were able to put the poll up?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, I
Thank
see
you.
results now.
Okay, yes. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds to answer this poll, to think about what's most useful. Okay. Give you about 5 more seconds. All of them, I'm getting a response. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. I'll share the results with you. So you can see here, we're pretty split across the boards. People like something of everything. That's great. A big reason I ask you this is just to help reinforce that idea that when you're trying to evaluate how effective your teaching is, it's more than just a course evaluation. You should be using data from multiple sources to get a more complete picture of how effective your teaching actually is. So lots of resources that are available. You have a teaching excellence center. If you're able to consult with those folks, very, very useful. Okay, so that is our first section. Now what I want to do is I want to move on to just a structure for gathering feedback. I mentioned earlier that one weakness of peer evaluation or even course evaluations is that we don't use a structured process. So I want to talk to you about 2 options that you have available. Others exist, but these are just 2, and this is one of our objectives. So Mike, I'm curious if you want to put this in the chat. What structure does your program use now to create their course evaluation questions? Do you know what structure they're using? Just randomly putting questions in? Are you unsure? Set by a faculty committee. That can happen. Our assessment, we have an assessment committee in my college as well that I oversee, and we work with our curriculum committee. Okay, you're currently redoing your structure. Okay. As a person that's involved with course evaluations, I'm very aware of what the structure is of the questions and why we're asking certain questions. But oftentimes it can feel like a random type of process. We just picked questions from somewhere and what should we include? So let me talk to you a little bit about some structures that are available to you. So one structure that you can use that I really love to evaluate teaching using is Chickering and Gamson's 7 Principles of Effective Education. It's a little bit of older citation, but I find it to be very long-standing in its utility. So looking at student-faculty interaction, their cooperative learning, how are they doing active learning? Do you give students prompt feedback and time on task? Do you communicate high expectations? And do you respect that students learn differently and have different talents and different needs, and how do you accommodate those things? So this is one type of structure that you can use. A second structure that I really love is from Glassick and colleagues, and it's the 6 standards of scholarly work. So I told you earlier about Lee Shulman and the Carnegie Foundation for Teaching. And moving from scholarly teaching, you can start to look at the 6 standards of scholarly work. So does your teaching have clear goals, adequate preparation, appropriate methods, significant results, effective presentation, and reflective critique? So this can actually look at any types of scholarship, the scholarship of teaching and learning being one of them, but even discovery types of research you can evaluate the quality using these 6 standards. So I love these 2 particular structures for organizing my course evaluation questions. Like I said, others exist, but I find these 2 from the literature to be very useful. Just to give you an example of how you can align your questions with the 6 standards of scholarly work, for example, if the first standard I told you was clear goals, you can ask a question about your course objectives. The course objectives facilitate your learning. Maybe adequate preparation, that the relevance of this course was discussed related to my future practice or my future career. Appropriate teaching methods. We could look at the organization of the course. We could look at how content is reinforced throughout the course. Maybe different types of teaching activities that were used, just as some examples. Even significant results, we could ask about test questions and grading tools. Effective presentation, could look at, are you providing feedback to the students? Can they rate you on your ability to provide feedback? And is that feedback evaluative, like just a grade, or is it descriptive? Do you have some information that's goal-oriented, helping students figure out what they did and didn't do well, and where they could make improvements? And then certainly you could have a summary question and some overall comments. So I had mentioned to you years ago when I was first asked to revise our course evaluations, I had a student group come in as a focus group to talk to me about what would help them answer the questions and want to actually complete the course evaluation, since we kind of suffer from poor response rates. And they said, we used to ask 2 or 3 open-ended comments. What did you like? What didn't you like? What are your overall thoughts? And they said, just ask us one question. We don't need multiple open-ended questions, because we end up repeating the same things over and over again. So just offer us one question. I find that it's helpful to offer a summary item, because this is something you may track over time more easily, unless there's something specific related to your teaching philosophy that you are tracking over time. For example, like your objectives. Do students perceive that you have clear objectives? And maybe that's part of your teaching belief, that you believe in the importance of effective, measurable, and specific objectives for your lectures. So just to give you some examples of what you can do to structure your course evaluations and the questions. So hopefully that was useful, just to think about the structure and how you're going to document your teaching effectiveness ultimately, and triangulating. So for section 3, I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about some best practices for designing and administering course evaluations. So if this is something you're not directly involved in, you may be able to give feedback to the group that is involved in this. And I have derived this from these suggestions from the review article I had mentioned to you. I have the reference there at the bottom of the slide for you. So for designing course evaluations, 4 questions, or I'm sorry, 4 best practices that come up. One is question creating. So what questions are we going to use? It's obviously very important. For example, when I first started reviewing the existing course evaluations we had in our college, one of the questions was, the grade that I expect to get in this course is A, B, C, D. And the faculty at the time really felt like that was important because it would give some context to the evaluation, that a student that's failing, maybe if there's negative evaluation, surely they're from the students that are failing. So really thinking about, do we actually need those types of questions? I find it easier to look more at those 6 standards of scholarly teaching. That's how we've designed our course evaluations. And just really think about what's the intent of the questions that you're asking. There was a very interesting study done by Ryan and Harrison that with their study, they found that the 2 most important criteria students used in judging teaching effectiveness were examination fairness and the amount of content learned. So certainly examination fairness and the amount of content can fit very nicely into those 6 standards of scholarly teaching. So think about what questions you're going to use, but also make sure that the students understand what your questions are asking. When we revised our questions, we did several focus groups with students for them to think aloud and explain to us what they perceived the questions meant, because sometimes we use educational jargon and students aren't always clear what the question is asking. And certainly that's going to affect how you interpret the results, because it's going to affect how they respond to the question. So maybe that seems like an easy one when you're designing what questions should you be asking. Another area to focus on is how many questions should you actually be asking? Now, there's not a lot of data saying what's the best number to use. Certainly, when you think about the big picture, too few questions are not going to provide you enough feedback to make improvements, and too many can create survey fatigue and then ultimately decrease your response rate. Maybe you have students that don't complete the evaluation. I have a colleague that wants to move to just 1 question. He just wants to ask students 1 question. And I do think that that is kind of an interesting concept. I don't know how much, if I was using the course evaluation summatively, 1 answer or 1 question may be enough. But for formative and trying to improve your teaching, I don't know that it gives you enough detail. It just seems more like an overall question. Now, there was some research that I have listed here at the bottom for you. So there was a focus group with medical students in 2017. They asked a small group of students how many questions they prefer. They said 15 questions. Anderson and colleagues have recommended 21 questions, including learner outcomes and summary and course questions about the course and the learning outcomes. Meyer and colleagues used 30 items. We have published using 10 course questions. And then if you also have multiple faculty teaching in your course, you could use 13 instructor questions. But if you do that, you can end up having a very long type of course evaluation, which again, some of you said 20% is your response rate. It sort of makes sense. The students are having some survey fatigue. So our recommendation would be 15 to 30 questions, but to think about if you have multiple faculty teaching in a course, if you have 5 people and you have 30 questions, students are answering 150 questions about all the faculty teaching in your course. So really think about that number and what is actually needed. The number of questions can be tricky. Another question that you need to ask when you're designing the questions is, should everyone use the same questions? Now, certainly there's some utility in using the same questions for everyone. It allows for comparison and consistency in reviewing all faculty. So this is really helpful for department chairs. In our college, all of our faculty use the same questions, but we only have 2 departments and everyone is teaching pharmacy. Either they're teaching pharmaceutical sciences or they're teaching clinical pharmacy. So they're doing one of those 2 things basically. So the questions are generally applicable to both of those departments. Now, it can be challenging to use the same questions when you have multiple disciplines, because ratings can vary by discipline, and then comparing one department to another can be unfair. It also can be challenging to use the same questions when the format of the delivery of the course is different. So Sadie was telling me earlier that she offers a lab course. Well, your lab questions, if you offer course questions in a lab course, many of the questions are going to be not applicable. You're not oftentimes lecturing in a lab. It's more about feedback, and you may not have a lot of feedback questions, for example, on your course evaluation. So our recommendation would be certainly consider using a standardized list of questions, but limit that number and think about who your audience is. And do we really need, if we have different departments, can we modify those evaluations? One option is to use a core set, but allow faculty to add additional questions, or to go back to what we talked about earlier, this minute evaluation or the mid-semester evaluation, where faculty can just create their own questions, but there's also a formal course evaluation. I'd also strongly advocate for using a not applicable option as one of your answers, so that if it doesn't apply to your course, students don't have to rate it. And then the fourth question is, when you're designing, is how do you assess the students' perceptions? Rating scales are the most common psychometric scale used, and they tend to vary between 5 and 7 items. So using a Likert scale, or depending on where you're from, you may pronounce it a Likert scale. You can use 5 categories: strongly agree to strongly disagree, or poor to excellent. So when we review these different types of options, a 5-point may be offered a better understanding of faculty, that they understand what strongly agree to strongly disagree means. Students may also better understand that. If you use a 7-point scale, it's not always clear what the distinctions are. So using less than 5 points is not going to discriminate. Using greater than 7 points is not going to offer anything better, but any additional new information. But I would recommend using a 5-point scale, because just people better understand what those distinctions are. What do you currently use at your own institution? Do you use a 5-point Likert scale? You can put it in the chat, 5 points. As one option, one person with 7 points. Yeah, so 5 to 7, the most common. Like I said, 5 points may be most understandable by the faculty reviewing the results and the students completing the evaluation. 4 additional considerations you want to make are how your evaluations are being administered to people. Certainly the number of faculty to evaluate in a course. How many of you have more than one person teach in your course? Does anyone? Okay. Shelby, you do? Well, how many people do you have? 2 people. Okay. 4. Okay. Several people. Being in a college of pharmacy and on a health sciences center campus, our College of Medicine, our College of Nursing, College of Pharmacy, we like to have what I call, or what other people call, the parade of stars. So we have sometimes 15 people teaching in a course, because we have every single disease matter expert come in and talk about their nuance. Yeah, we have a lot of people that teach in a course. So for our college, we do offer some guidelines about how many people should be teaching in a course, but that's another conversation. But we look at, if we have that many people in a course, that it's just too much for students to evaluate that many faculty members. So we have some alternatives, and we have a time hour requirement. So if you're teaching 5 hours in the course, lecture hours or more, you will get a full course evaluation. But if you're teaching less than 5 hours, you can get that minute evaluation, where the students will rank you on a scale of 1 to 5, and then just give you comments about your strengths and your areas of improvement. And I have all of my faculty in their course syllabi indicate which faculty are being evaluated. So all the students can see which faculty are going to be formally evaluated in the course, as well as informally evaluated with those minute evaluations. And as I mentioned before, if you do have a lot of faculty in your course and they're all teaching more than 5 hours, you could consider putting them on a schedule, like I mentioned earlier, evaluating people on a rolling basis, for example. But this is something, if you're having multiple people and your response rates are suffering, you may want to think about some alternative methods depending on the amount of time people are teaching. If someone's just teaching 1 hour of lecture, a minute evaluation really may be the most beneficial to them, especially because they'll get immediate feedback. We had mentioned previously, Sadie brought this up. So what technology should you use to administer your evaluations? Electronic, web-based, online survey tools are really the most common, and they save time and resources. They allow for quick dissemination of results. So since I have been here for 23 years and I have been teaching for about 26 years, I was part of the group that used to use paper course evaluations with a Scantron sheet. Did any of you ever complete course evaluations this way? Yeah, it used to be a pretty popular way. So the Teaching Excellence Center, when I was at Rutgers, or here at the OU College of Pharmacy, I was in charge of putting these packets together. We'd make a envelope full of the Scantrons and the question sheets, and we'd pass those out. And gosh, it was very time consuming. And another problem was processing all the results through the Scantron machine. It would really delay giving faculty feedback about their teaching. And sometimes they wouldn't get feedback for their teaching for 6 months or even a year. And at that point, people don't even remember what it is that they taught the year before. They're on to the new year. So electronic survey tools are much more popular and have their benefits. But I will say that some of my faculty, when the response rates are suffering, they make a plea to bring back the paper evaluations because they got good response rates. But if people aren't getting any feedback about their teaching for 6 months to a year, it doesn't really work. So what I encourage faculty to do is, if the process of using paper helped facilitate gathering feedback, then mimic that in your class. And the way that I do that is that I ask all of my faculty to designate one day on their course schedule that will be a course evaluation day. It's typically the end of the semester. We open our course evaluations for 4 weeks, 2 weeks before finals, the week of finals, the week after finals. And I ask faculty during the last 2 weeks of class to open up the course evaluation, to put that date on their syllabus, and then to give students the last 10 minutes of class to open up their laptops and to complete the course evaluation for that course. So to actually give them class time. And we have seen some variable results with this. So how to administer them and what technology to use. We use Course Eval. It's a program. What do you use in your programs? Do you use your learning management system or Qualtrics? Qualtrics, okay. Paper or Qualtrics? Google Forms, okay. The LMS. So one advantage of using a course evaluation program is that it can archive the results and it can allow you to make some comparisons across courses or faculty, and we can have multiple people access those results. One limitation for us with the LMS, we use Desire to Learn, is that only that faculty member has access to the results. So during annual review, that makes it difficult for the department chair to conduct annual review. Okay, just some other things to think about. When to administer them. You want to administer towards the end of the semester. Sometimes faculty like to give them on the day of the final, but that can really cause students to just focus on giving you an evaluation of your final exam. There has been some research to show that the point in the term, middle end of course, it doesn't make a difference. I think that's kind of interesting, but just more traditionally, we consider a window of 2 to 4 weeks at the end of the semester. So the end of the semester is the most common. Another question we have is about should they be mandatory? So I get this from all over the country being an assessment person. So we certainly want to have a response rate of greater than 70%. That's going to be more generalizable types of results. And sometimes faculty want to use mandatory completion to reach that 70%. So they either use a stick, they're going to withhold grades, or they're going to withhold just releasing the final exam scores, or they use some sort of carrot. They're going to offer bonus points. And there is advantage to that. It certainly can get more people to respond, but the disadvantage is that it can be perceived as coercion. Even if it's a stick or a carrot, it can be considered coercion. And there are some regulations and even institutional review board policies that designate students as a protected and vulnerable population. And in those scenarios, you want to minimize the possibility of coercion or undue influence. So I would discourage you from offering a carrot or a stick. There are other options you could use. You could select a random sample. In our course evaluation program, it allows you to generate a random sample. Or you can take more of the formative approach and say, what's most important to me is that we're comparing your results over time, and that can give you a more complete picture. So this is a big topic of conversation. Now I just want to talk to you quickly about thinking how to use your results. So one is that we need a transparent plan when we are conducting course evaluations. Who is seeing the evaluation and what are they being used for? Faculty need to be very aware of what that process is. Who has results? How are they going to be distributed? Who is seeing them? So we have we use a very structured process. After grades are submitted, you will receive those results a week later. Unless it's Christmas time, I wait until, like I told you before, I wait until after the Christmas break. And when we think about results availability, you want to encourage people to remember that the goal of course evaluations are to improve teaching and learning, and they should not be used in isolation. That big point from before. Now, as was brought up earlier, we want to think about the idea that there can be bias in the course evaluation results. So there is plenty of literature I have listed at the bottom of this particular slide for you that has documented bias in research related to gender and to race, just as an example. Now, some of the things that you will see bias play itself out in your course evaluation results is that women are more likely to be called Mrs. or teacher, whereas doctor is often can be reserved for men. So if you're ever read through your teaching results and they were calling you Mrs. whatever, then that struck you as odd. This is one example of bias in your course evaluations. Women are more likely to have their appearance commented on, and similar types of bias are found with gender and race. So the big thing that you need to be aware of, one, is training students and all your faculty about implicit and explicit bias. Very, very important, especially related to course evaluations. And when your results are being interpreted, you need to remind stakeholders that this bias exists. So this is very important to look at, especially if we're using course evaluations for summative purposes like promotion and tenure, annual review and raises, or teaching awards. Very important that we recognize that bias exists. You may not even realize it, but this is actually happening, and it can impact how the results are interpreted. I always encourage using a mentor to help you evaluate your results. So your Teaching Excellence Center is a great resource for that, but you can also have your peers. They can help you be objective about your course evaluations and help you interpret them. Sometimes it's hard to read through the course evaluations. A peer or a person trained in course evaluations from your Teaching Excellence Center can offer you that feedback. The last thing I would recommend is probably what I find to be the most useful thing to use when you're interpreting results. And I have all of our faculty and graduate students and residents use this particular process. So certainly when you're interpreting the results, you're going to do some self-reflection. We've talked about that already. We've talked about triangulating your results and thinking about reflecting on is, do these results reflect my experience in the course? If I was teaching differently, what would I do next time? But the biggest things that I would encourage you to do are to mine your data and to also create a faculty action plan. So in my college, we do data mining, but I just wanted to show you one faculty action plan that you could use in your college if needed. So you would identify certain courses to create an action plan if their overall course evaluation score was less than 3.5 on a 1 through 5 scale, or if they had a 0.5 drop in their mean course rating over 1 year. So from last year to this year, they've had a 0.5 drop in their course evaluation result. So they've gone from a 3.0 to a 2.5, or if there's some critical issue that exists, like a high course failure rate that hasn't been seen before. So faculty can create this action plan about how they're going to address the deficiency or resolve the problem. And student liaisons can even be used to offer feedback about the plan. So this can be helpful for a variety of reasons: systematic process for dealing with people that are below benchmark and having negative comments. It certainly can create a more transparent process and increase accountability, and students can be involved so they'll see what the value of course evaluations are. And it can help improve course delivery and ratings so that we have an accountable process and we can work through it as a group on how are we going to improve teaching. So teaching more is community property, and we're here to help each other. But what I love to do is this last part number 5, which is just a continuation from part 4. It's mining your data. Have any of you heard of this before? Mining your data? Maybe when you see it, you may think, oh yeah, it makes sense. So mining your data is reviewing your results. So there's some different ways to do this. The first, certainly you're going to have the questions that you're going to review. You're going to look at your mean, mode, standard deviation, for example. And you may also have general questions about your course overall. I would rate these lectures presented by the instructor. And then you're going to have student comments. So that's all the data that you have access to. Sometimes there's variability in overall comments versus very course specific comments or instructor specific comments, but you get numeric data and you get open-ended comments. Like I said, when you're reviewing the numbers and numeric data, I like to look at the response rate first. How representative is this sample? What's the mean? What's the standard deviation? And then do we know any college averages or department averages, as well as what are our previous results? So I encourage people to keep a tally of an ongoing table of your overall scores. And there is some research that shows that even a limited response rate can still be generalizable. Sometimes people have the misperception that it's only the people that loved you or hated you that replied to the course evaluation. But there has been a study that has shown that compared low response rates compared to high response rates, the same themes and data were established and similar numeric scores. So you can look at that data, do some reflection questions. What are my trends? Does this align with my teaching philosophy? But what I want you to do, spend a lot of time on, is thinking about your student comments. So as we established at the very beginning of our time together, we tend to hone in out of these 15 questions, these 15 comments, we're going to hone in on the one comment that was negative. Lectures were dry, straight off the lecture notes or the syllabus. I slept through most of them. And that's the one we're probably going to remember. Doesn't matter that the other 14 comments are actually positive. So I always worry about faculty when they do this, because if they focus on the one negative comment, it really can be demoralizing and it can make you feel really bad about your teaching and not like teaching. And it's only one comment, but I have a hard time sometimes convincing faculty of that. So what I want them to do is avoid overemphasizing the negative, dismissing negative results, not summarizing. So the way to do that is mine your data. So I have 3 different steps. When you're mining your data, you are color coding and quantifying your student comments. So you're going to review all the comments. You're going to identify themes. You're going to re-review the comments and then code the theme when they're mentioned. And then you're going to count up those themes. So I'll give you an example. Some themes that you can look at are lecture style. You can look at your people may comment about your objectives. They may comment about your test questions. Another theme may be the instructional materials that you use, your handouts or your slides, maybe your ability to manage time, active learning, or your attitude towards students. They may have comments about how your interactions are in class. What you can do with the comments is you have those themes. You can take a theme and assign it a specific color and then read through all the comments and note that color. So I certainly have given you this list of comments, but the first thing you're going to do is read all the comments to see, are all of those themes applicable, and then do a color coding schematic. So go through, review all of the themes and color code them. So when were they talking about your objectives? When were they talking about your presentation style? When were they talking about interactions? So you can do all of that, look for those themes. Then you can do some reflection. What did the themes mean to you? What do they affirm? What should you improve upon? But what I really want you to do after you get all those themes is quantify them. Maybe because I'm an assessment person, I really love numbers, but I like to make things that are inherently subjective more objective. So I want people to quantify the number of people that said that particular theme, whether it was positive or negative, because this can help you better focus on what is representative. What is the real picture of what's happening in your course, instead of just honing in. Faculty members' tendency to just hone in on the one negative thing. So you can quantify those results. You can put a representative phrase that the students have said. You can use this maybe in your teaching philosophy. You can give evidence. You can make an evidence-based teaching philosophy using your course evaluation results. I have an article about that. That is something else. I have a rubric and 9 steps you need to use when you're writing a teaching philosophy. But making it evidence-based, you can use the themes from your course evaluations to talk about what your strengths are and what your areas of improvement are. One way I do that is using this simple data collection form. So I just have a section at the bottom that says strengths and a section that says weaknesses or areas of improvement. I like to use areas of improvement instead. Write those themes down. What number of people said your objectives were good? How many people said that? That goes into the strengths column. If people said you have bad objectives, they're not measurable, they're not specific, you never use them in your assessment, they're not aligned with your teaching or your assessment questions, then that's going to go in the negative. And then you can rank order those. So you get a real complete picture of what are the comments saying about your class. So this can help you be more objective. You're mining your data. So you've already done numeric comparisons. Now you're taking those themes, color coding them, and quantifying them. Rank order and decide what are the biggest strengths of my lecture? What are the biggest areas of improvement of my lecture? So how likely do you like this particular, have you seen this before? Is it something you think you could use? Tell me your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I think so. I have not seen this before.
I find it a very useful strategy. So for example, when I do a teaching evaluation, I just did 2 yesterday. I have my 10-page teaching rubric that I like to use. And I have a section on the rubric that is triangulating. So I have, what do the faculty think they're doing well and need to work on? What do I think they're doing well and need to work on? And what do the students say? So even on my teaching debriefs, I triangulate for them. And when I say, tell me what the students said that they liked about your lecture, I say, show me your summary form. And then we review. So that's for one lecture, but you could do it for a course as well. Overall, what are students saying about your teaching in your course? What do they like about your course? So hopefully this is something that you can use. So I hope that overall this has been useful to think about course evaluations, whether you're designing them or administering them or any kind of input or influence you can have over them. And really just spending some time thinking about how to interpret your course evaluation results and how to make them useful so that they can help you improve your teaching in the future and not just be a bad memory of the one negative comment that you carry around with you. I find that doing that data collection and data mining sheet really does help you better put the one negative comment in a bubble and kind of blow it away. That it was one person. Look at this, 95 other people said that they loved this particular thing. It was just one person that didn't like it. You're not going to make everyone happy. So I hope that this was useful. Tell me what questions you have.
Yeah, this was super useful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this. I know it is 11:15, so if anyone needs to head out, please feel free to do so. But otherwise, if you have questions, you can ask those too.
Melissa, one question I have is about the bias. Are you aware of any research on ways people administering, so professors in their own classes can reduce that bias when when students are given the eval form, or is that just something we have to account for on the back end?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think there's not a lot, I haven't seen a lot of research about how to address it in course evaluations. I've seen it more of how to address it in general. Training students and faculty, everyone, on implicit and explicit bias, and doing that on a regular basis, having people really do more self-reflection about what are some of their implicit biases. Are they even aware of, obviously they're not aware of them. How do you raise your awareness? So I think at a minimum, reminding students that we all have implicit and explicit biases. Please make sure that you keep those in check when you're filling out this evaluation. That could even be part of the instructions.
Cool. Okay. I'll look more into that.
Yeah. Does your university offer training about implicit and explicit biases?
Not in, I'm sure that there are pockets of training and professional development that would bring those themes in. Definitely at the CTL, it's something we might talk about at different points, but I don't think there's like a formal process.
I know search committees are often trained before they make searches, but outside of that, I haven't seen really specific trainings that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I was on our provost search committee this year, and I had to go through that kind of training. But our university, in part because we're working with patients, it's mandatory that all of our faculty and students complete that, and staff, on a regular basis. So each year they have to complete implicit and explicit bias training.
That makes sense given the work that your students will be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.